Hey, hello.
Hey, how's it going?
How's it going? Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you. Am I coming through okay?
Yeah, you are.
Good.
Okay, hey, great. Thanks for taking the time to speak with me today. I really appreciate it. One journalist
Yeah,
to another.
absolutely. I'm sorry we didn't connect earlier. It's just been crazy.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sure. I've been going through similar things. I feel like every day it's like five or six obligations.
Yeah.
But great to be here speaking with you now. Basically, the goal I'm sort of getting at from the beginning, I'll let you know, is just sort of looking at like not only like where you're at now, but sort of how you got there. That's sort of the premise behind my project. So, I suppose my first question is just how did you know you wanted to be a journalist?
That probably goes back to I remember in junior high they brought in like those career counselor people who like give you the aptitude tests, and I remember telling the woman that I sat down with, she was like, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I want to work in sports," which she immediately took as like, "I want to be an athlete." And it's like, no, I know that's not my future. That's okay. And I was like, I don't know. I want to write about them or like do commentary, something like that. And I mean, I'm old. I'm 41. So but so you fill out this thing and they come back a couple days later and she's like, "Yeah, this is what you got." And I opened the paper and it said wood technologist, finding new and creative uses for wood, which I think we've maxed out our knowledge of wood at this point. But she said like, "Oh no, you have to be a lot more realistic about like the availability of these jobs." And it just kind of stuck in the back of my head for years and years. Like, no, I really want to work in or around sports. And, that didn't happen immediately. I didn't take a very standard path towards this career. I finished up high school, I went to community college, realized I wasn't really happy. I took a job in IT, and that was kind of the path I was going down for a while, and kind of fell backward into eventually getting the whole dream that I was going for, I guess. um, yeah, like I said, I started in IT and everything, and I just was writing about sports on just a, I think like blog spot thing, just writing about fights for fun. And my friend Scott Christ, who runs Bad Left Hook, um, that was my site, was badlefthook.blogspot.com or whatever it was back then. But he was working for SB Nation, running their Baltimore Orioles blog. And he pitched to them. He was like, "Hey, I want to write about boxing. My friend has a blog. Check it out." And like an hour later, he called and he was like, "Hey, they just bought badlefthook.com. So you're writing here now." And then I moved from there over to Bloody Elbow pretty quickly, just because at the time I was way more into MMA than boxing. And, you know, then it just kind of went from there. But it was kind of like that's what I wanted to do, but that's not what I was going to be doing. And then, circumstances just worked out to where now it's like 17 years later and I've been doing this full time all but maybe 6 months of that.
Awesome. The thing that stuck out to me is, contextually, I think we both understand that boxing as a sport is much more accepted, like historically, than MMA has been. And you said that you were a fan of MMA all the way, like in high school, which is, roughly when you're 19, you said
Well,
4 years.
right.
So how
I
were
mean,
you into MMA then? Yeah.
I can say specifically the first and the junior high thing that was when I said I wanted to work in sports. I think that was I was talking about like football,
Oh,
basketball, that kind of stuff.
okay.
But the first UFC that I ever saw, or the first MMA event, was UFC 10, which I rented after riding my bike to a video store down the road from my house. So that would have been, God, I don't remember off the top of my head what year that was.
I
Was that
believe
97?
I believe that's 98.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. 96. Okay.
Oh, shoot.
So
Okay.
so it was 96, which means yeah, I probably saw it in 97 by the time it came out to VHS and all that.
And what was your, I guess, experience with MMA like? Were you hooked immediately? Did it come back to you?
Well, yeah, no, it was a big thing right away. Like I grew up a big action movie fan because of my dad, which I got super into Jean-Claude Van Damme stuff. So once I learned what the UFC was doing, I was like, oh, this is Bloodsport Lionheart, but for real. Like, so it had an immediate appeal. And then I think UFC 10 having like Mark Coleman, and it's like, oh, that guy, he looks like he belongs in a movie about a guy that beats the hell out of dudes. So it like clicked, and then there's the transition where all of a sudden Maurice Smith is in, and it's like, all right, well, Mark Coleman's this big dude, but Maurice Smith kicks dudes in the head like people I saw in those movies. So like it kept kind of building on, okay, this guy does this. And then that's as the sport's evolving. So it just kind of absorbed me more into it as I was watching.
Now, was boxing, were you also a fan of that earlier on, or?
Yeah, I was a big boxing guy as a kid. My dad, like I said, was a movie buff, which means we always had HBO, and he literally would make sure any movie that came on HBO that we didn't already have recorded, he would record. So we had these huge boxes of movies, but that also meant I had boxing on the weekends. So we would watch that. And when I was really young, my great grandfather gave me a book about Muhammad Ali. I don't know why. He read it and he was like, hey, this is great. And then when I was in elementary school, um, Muhammad Ali had a house, I guess, 15 minutes away from where we went to school. And our high school got a new gym built, and Muhammad Ali came for the gym dedication. And because my grandpa had given me that book, I was like, oh, this guy's a big deal. Like I didn't properly know at fourth grade, like how big of a deal. But with good behavior in that elementary school, you got these little tickets and you could turn them in for drawings. So I hoarded all my tickets until there was a drawing for 10 kids to get to meet him at the gym opening. And I dumped my tickets in and I got picked. So I met him then. Um, and then it's a weird thing where I met him again a few years later because um, my father's friend was his plumber. And he was like, oh, I know a kid who's a big boxing fan. And he was like, oh, bring him over here. So I went there. That was 94 because I have a signed glove from that trip that he dated. And then in 2021, or I'm sorry, 2001, when my dad was getting married to a second wife, um, it was down in Florida. So I went to the airport in South Bend, and Muhammad Ali's house in this area was in Berrien Springs, Michigan. So I got there, I get on the plane, and I look to my left because I had a stopover in Atlanta, which was Muhammad Ali's actual house. I'm in seat 1B. He's right across the aisle in seat 1C. So it's like I just kept running into him, and at the same time was watching boxing and hearing about boxing from my grandpa. And like, so boxing was like my initial thing. Um, Roy Jones Jr., Pernell Whitaker, those were like the guys that really captivated me then. Like Mike Tyson was just on the early side of like, I remember being in the room when my parents would be watching a fight with their friends or whatever, because that was, what everybody did. But wasn't the hook for me outside of like Punch Out, the video game and stuff. But
Mhm.
it was like that thing that kept happening with Muhammad Ali, plus seeing Roy Jones, especially Roy Jones. I mean, that was. everything, but those things just kind of kept hooking me in to the sport. Where boxing never went away. UF or MMA, there was like this little period where it kind of faded, and it was like the availability of the tapes around here wasn't keeping up. And then that happened until like the first Pride Grand Prix, which I just happened to get on pay-per-view in my house, and that was where like the second wave kicked off for me. But yeah, boxing was the first love.
I guess you were talking about before, like when you started writing. I guess how did your you knew that you wanted to write, but I guess how did you go about actually writing, getting published, getting out there in the journalist space? What was
Well,
that journey like?
yeah, I mean, like I said, it was just back then you just had an idea, you'd start up a blog, whatever, and maybe people read it, maybe people didn't. I don't think anybody was reading it. It was just at that time was when SB Nation was really kind of getting rolling, and they were just looking for properties to scoop up. And if somebody pitched something to them and they looked at it and they thought the writing was good enough, and I mean good enough, I don't mean good. I mean, like if it could scrape by, then a lot of times they would just be like, "Oh, let's give it a try." So that was really what happened. Was they Scott pitched that blog to the higher ups there. They just bought the URL and said, "Tell him he can work here if he wants." So that's literally it. Like there wasn't it was just a fortunate, like so much of like my personal thing are all these fortunate little coincidences. Like my best friend wrote the Baltimore Orioles blog for them and pitched my thing to them. Also, I don't know why my best friend was writing for the Baltimore Orioles blog when we live in Michigan. Like it didn't make sense, but that really led to full careers for both of us just writing about fights. So, sometimes it's just pure luck.
I guess you look at what you've covered so far. I'm curious what stands out to you as memorable.
I guess just being around for so long, it's really seeing like the transformations where you'll think like it just came up the other day. I think somebody posted a video of Gabriel Gonzaga knocking out Crow Cop and saying that was 17 years ago, which is like right when I started writing as a career. And it's like, man, that feels like yesterday. But then I look at the structure of the sport now compared to then, and it's like weird how much has changed while fundamentally staying the same. Like it was a long, long time ago when uh, John Nash and I broke the story that fighters were suing the UFC. Like we were the ones that broke it. We worked really hard on that story. It was a long time ago and it just wrapped up now.
Right.
And it's like the sport has changed so much just in the time of that lawsuit took. And it's really interesting to look at it and go, oh, this changed, this changed, this changed. But also to kind of realize how small that change can be while feeling big. Like that lawsuit was about a thing that ultimately is still a thing now, but nothing changed. So it's kind of like there's so many big stories that I've covered, whether it's that or, some of the tougher things that I covered, which were, big abuse stories or, assault, stuff like that. And it's almost a negative to say it like this, but these were things that as I was writing them, I was like, and this is going to lead to change in some meaningful way. And no, like none of it did. So it's like these things that in the moment felt like, oh, these are going to lead to such important, meaningful change, lead to nothing really. So then it kind of pulls you back into Man, there's a lot of cool fights I've covered, so those are the good memories. So, but there's still good in that to where, the grind of like covering the UFC right now. It's
Mhm.
not always fun. It's grindy. The Apex shows can be really boring. There's not that same buzz that there always used to be. But then I feel like UFC 300 is one of the most memorable nights I've had in 17 or whatever years of writing about the sport because it gave me those old feelings again. Everything felt big and exciting. And I was talking to a friend about this the other day, but it was the first show I could remember in years where it was like not just the next day, but days later, I was still thinking, like, oh, yeah, and that happened. And it's not just like, oh, the Max Holloway thing. It's like, oh, and Yuri when he did. It was the first time in so many years that it was like a week later. I was like, oh, I need to go back and watch that. I'm excited about this. Remember, this happened. So, like, UFC 300 almost feels like one of the biggest moments of me covering the sport just because it, like, gave me life again in feeling something about watching fights.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, my UFC 300 viewing experience, I think, was also phenomenal. Like most of the time, I'm cooped up, but I was at like a Dave and Buster's, and you just have like 30 odd relatively intoxicated people, and we're watching, the Max Holloway moment, which was insane. But like you say, Yuri, even like because it's like the New York slant, a lot of people were chanting for like Aljamain, even though that fight was
Right.
so.
Yeah.
But um, yeah, no, I totally agree, especially with what you say about sort of how you see some monotony in certain Apex cards. It's sort of getting through the motions. I think that the Apex has, like I sort of did, not to go on a whole long thing here, but the Apex has like so fundamentally changed the UFC in terms of that they have the shoehorn now. That before it was they always had to get the venue, but I feel like that fun. Like how does the Apex change like your coverage? How would you like sort of agree that it's
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's, and I feel like you can actually see it if you look around every major website that when people are writing about Apex shows, you don't feel like there's a whole lot of like spark and passion there. And, you know, been around a long time. I remember it used to be every UFC card when we'd be writing about it, you know, guys from different sites would be messaging each other, like, bouncing ideas and stuff. The Apex shows just feel like every now and then, yeah, you can look at a card and be like, all right, it's in the Apex, but that's a good card. Like, no way around it. But now it feels like when you watch even a fight night that happens in front of a crowd, there's so much more energy to it. And I feel like that carries over into the viewing experience. It carries over into how people are interacting with that show on social media. It carries over into how people write about it, how people talk about it. And it's kind of just like caused these dead spots where it almost feels like let's just get through this. And man, fights are exciting. There shouldn't be a time where you're like, let's just get through these fights. It should be, let's watch these dudes fight. And, but that's what happens when you end up with a contract that says, give us X number of shows a year. Yeah, at a certain point, it's easier to just go, we have a building, we'll stick a couple hundred people in there, you get your show. So, I don't think it's good for the sport, but it also like it's not all doom and gloom. It's not killing the sport or anything. It's just there's not that constant level of excitement for the next fights like there used to be because it just the churn, it doesn't let up and it doesn't give you that space to be like, oh, I want fights, I miss fights. Instead, it's just, here's more, here's more, here's more. So, it's changed things in a lot of ways, I don't think many of them are good, but I also like you'll see people be like, this is killing the UFC. No, it's not. They're making a ton of money by doing this. So,
Mhm.
you know, it, it's strange.
I'm curious. Recently in the boxing world, ton of ton of excitement now for this August 3rd card. There was, of course, there's still a ton of excitement for this June 1st card. Both of these are part of this whole Rihad season, the Saudi Arabian, contraption by Turki Al Sheikh. I'm curious,
Okay.
what do you make? Have you noticed that in your coverage of boxing, are these Saudi cards? Are they invigorating excitement? Are they? What do you make of it, given that you've seen boxing for however long?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, those cards are coming up and they're exciting, and you look at them top to bottom, and you're like, this is what a card should look like, especially at the prices that you're charging for fights now, especially on the heels of like Ryan Garcia, Devin Haney. That undercard was not great. And then we have Canelo and Munguia coming up this weekend. That undercard is trash, and they are charging 89.99. That's crazy. The chief support card is an interim title fight featuring the interim champion against the WBC's number 20 ranked welterweight. $90. That it's bad.
Are you
So
referencing? Sorry, are you referencing Barrios versus Maidana?
yeah,
Okay, yeah.
yeah. So then you do look at these cards that you know are more loaded, and it's like this is good for the boxing public. But then you also kind of have that thing that sits in the back of your mind, and it's that at what cost thing, where there's reason to be hesitant with things getting funded by Saudi Arabia. We saw when WWE started their deal with them, like that landed them on basically an entire episode of John Oliver's show talking about, the human rights issues and stuff. And that was kind of fresh off the heels of the killing of Khashoggi. And so it's kind of there's this part that's kind of bitter to swallow, but then at the same time, you know how it's keeping a sport going in a positive direction. It's keeping these fighters paid, and man, not to excuse human rights violations or anything, but goddamn, if most boxing promoters are not throughout history are not among I won't say the worst people to ever live, but they're not all good guys. So, at this point, I think, and maybe it's cynical to say, like, I just kind of want to enjoy a boxing card that's good from top to bottom, because you are seeing enthusiasm from boxing fans and even boxing media to see a card that's like every one of these fights has a reason to be happening, has an impact, carries forward into something that isn't just let's get this guy a stay busy fight to win, and maybe in a year he gets a big fight. So, it's really complicated, and it's like I don't want to let either side of that go all the way. Like I do want to question things that I think need to be questioned and at least have an eye kept on them. But I also want to see the sports that I love do really well, all, both as a fan and because when they do well, I'm in a more stable place in my employment. If boxing falls off a cliff and UFC goes behind it, then I don't know what I do, but it's not good. So I think that that is a thing about being. I don't want to just say a fight fan because there's a lot of these conflicts that come up being a fan of any kind of sports team or athlete. that you have to make certain compromises to accept the betterment of the sport or the team or whatever. You know, you might end up with a really bad guy on your football team, but if he helps you win five more games and make the playoffs, it becomes a lot easier to accept. So I don't know if that made a whole lot of sense, but
No, yeah, I think so. And I think, we're talking about sort of having that integrity, making sure that, you're keeping things in check. Another problem that I'd really like your perspective on, or we can even see how we're defining it as a problem, but I've noticed, especially now, again, more UFC slanted, but with media, with a lot of these like post-fight interviews, it just seems to me, I'm fresh out of the journalism program, so I might be a little bit too textbook here, but I oftentimes seems a lot like cheerleading. And then combining that with a lot of these media figures like Nina drama that is essentially from the UFC, by the UFC, for the UFC. I'm curious, where do you think journalism is at in that sense, the health of it?
I think it's taken a lot of steps backward. And, it's always been difficult dealing with the UFC and Dana White because he has such a us versus them view of things that it doesn't matter how legitimate something you come to him with is. If he sees that as a, against them, then it doesn't matter. Here you can get, I mean, we saw Ariel was Dana's guy for years and years and years, but you step over the line once, all of a sudden he's banned from ever being credentialed again. And then, they work things out and they're cool again. And then all of a sudden he's banned again. And that's the biggest dude in the sport. And I mean, I am not saying this to badmouth Ariel, but there were times back then where people would talk about him like, oh my God, this guy is a pure UFC shill. He's, in Dana's pocket. And then compare what he used to do then to like what some of these people do now. And it's like a combination of the UFC finally pushing the media and molding it to be what they want it to be. And I think kind of this influencer culture and everything that has become more about like what we do and the importance and foundation of what we're trying to do doesn't matter as long as it's funny, uh, controversial, like anything. And for these people, the easiest thing to do is keep on the good side, get your content, and move forward. Now, I'm again getting to be pretty old. I've been around a long time. I run into a lot of people now who are like thrown off that I won't accept like a weird thing. Um, sorry, like the new WWE video game came out, and they're like, "Hey, would you like a review copy?" And I'm like, "I'm not doing a review of it. No, thank you." People are like, "Oh, you wouldn't take a free copy of a video game?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's a review copy. I'm not reviewing it. That's not like ethical to me to do that." But I've noticed that's how we all used to kind of act 10 years ago. And now any access, any gift, anything, people are so quick to jump at. And it's like, I feel like it is that eroding of, you know what it is? It's that now these people, a lot of these people see themselves as, I'm not a journalist, I'm media. And I think there's like a distinction between those two that like forgives basic ethics or um, even just best practices. Like, not everything is an ethical question. Sometimes it's just, is this the best way to do this job? And I do think that it's kind of the rise of influencer culture has led to a distortion of what a younger, fights have a younger fan base in general. So there's this distortion of how it's viewed to be media. And then it becomes this dirty word to say journalist to a lot of people, like, oh, don't worry about him. He's just a journalist. And it's like, and there should be some meaning to being a journalist. Like that means that you are doing the work that journalists have been doing for hundreds of years. And it's kind of crazy the way that it has slowly eroded from this group of guys and girls who really covered the UFC passionately, but also with a really critical eye into this modern, like, I don't know, just kiss ass and get clicks, I guess.
Hmm. Look, just I think due to technology and just overall, I think that's about good. I've really enjoyed speaking with you though. Thanks for the
Yeah,
time.
man.
Um,
Absolutely.
I really appreciate your insight, and yeah, I mean that's pretty much it. I just had a good time
Cool.
overall. Thanks.
Yeah, man. Yeah, take care.